First, let me say I'm John. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, John.
And it's an honor to follow Al-Anon. I haven't had a lot of experience with Al-Anon, but I remember the first experience I had was many years ago. I went on a 12-step call. There was an alcoholic not too far from my home group, and we went to his home, and we spoke with him and his wife. And there really wasn't anything that we could do for the alcoholic, but when I was looking at his wife, it really, really bothered me. It was obvious that she had been beaten, and she just told us she had fallen down. It was like something you'd see in a movie. And I don't know how it happened, but I somehow got her to an Al-Anon meeting in South Kansas City. And it was the most amazing experience I'd ever seen. I mean, I've seen it in AA, but for some reason it really moved me to see the people in that room embrace that woman. And I don't know whatever became of her, if she went back or not, but it was really a good experience to see that. And then, not in the last couple of years, my mother-in-law has gotten involved with Al-Anon. My brother-in-law died from alcoholism a few years ago, and I tried my best as an AA member to step in there and get him treatment and so forth, but nothing that I could do would help him. His wife, my mother-in-law's daughter, also suffered, and we didn't think that she was going to make it. But we couldn't do much for the alcoholics, but Al-Anon sure stepped in and helped my mother-in-law, and I'm grateful for that. So anyway, I went ahead and prepared some remarks, and I hope I don't bore you by coming across as if I'm reading them, but I just want to share my experience with you. I walked out of a jail cell in the summer of 1988 after being arrested for drunk driving for the third time in as many years. And when I left the jail, I was walking in search for my car. Back in those days, when the police arrested you, they would leave your car where you got arrested, which is nice. I guess now they tow it. But at any rate, I was walking through the city in search for my car. And I just remember looking at the rest of the world as if I was watching a movie, because I was watching all these normal people just going about their business, making their way to work, and I'm just stumbling around, dirty and disheveled, trying to piece together the memories of the previous night and figure out where my car was. Well, my journey took me across a bridge over I-35 as I was walking from downtown over to the west side where my car was. And I stopped on that bridge and I looked at the traffic passing below. It sounded like this train. I stopped and I thought that I would just jump and end it all. But I couldn't do that. I actually thought about the people in the cars. But I walked across that bridge. I got to my car. I drove to my apartment. And I took the first step in my recovery from alcoholism. And I made a phone call to the Kansas City area central office of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll never forget it. The person answered Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just said, I think I need help. And he paused in a very respectful way, as if he understood the severity of my plea for help. And very compassionately and understandingly, he told me where there was a meeting not far from where I was working at the time. It was the Downtown Nooners Group. And so I made it to that meeting. And when I got there, I was the first to arrive. And the room was empty except for the chairs that were arranged for the people. And the 12 steps and the 12 traditions were hanging on the wall. I'd never seen them before. And a man soon walked in with a pot of coffee and introduced himself. And he was just as kind and understanding as I could expect anybody to be. And that is really what I needed at that time, because I was living in a very, very angry time. Not a lot of people were happy with me, and not a lot of people wanted me around. And I didn't want people in my family to know what I was dealing with. So just to have people who understood me or wanted to understand me or would listen to me meant everything. So people filtered into the room. The room was filled up, and they gave me a first step meeting. And I'll never forget it because it was the first time I ever heard somebody say, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. It just stunned me because for years, all I wanted to do was deny that I was an alcoholic. And they shared their stories with me. And though the stories differed in ways, the feelings that we had about our drinking were spot on. The shame, the fear, the degradation, I could relate. And I knew then that I was an alcoholic. And I knew then that I believed that Alcoholics Anonymous could help me with my problem. I did well more than 90 meetings in 90 days. At that time, AA meetings were the only place that I felt comfortable. The people in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous spoke honestly, and looking forward to the meetings and going to the meetings is what gave me the power to overcome my obsession to drink, which was very, very strong in those days. The hardest part I found about stopping drinking is that we have a lot of problems from our drinking that still have to play out in those days when we're getting sober. And I remember I just wanted to drink to turn the brain off because all I could think about were these problems that were looming ahead of me and the problems that I was dealing with immediately. So the meetings saved me. I could not have stayed sober without those meetings. Well, eventually I got a home group and I got a sponsor. And my home group at the time was P3. And it remained my home group for 25 years. And my sponsor and everybody at P3 pretty much did this. We worked through the big book and the 12 and 12 as we went through the steps. And what we did is we studied that book and we related our own experiences to the people in the book. And we learned from our experiences and we learned how to, go through this process. Well, it was very helpful to me because I came to understand that there was a lot more that I needed to take care of than just not drinking. Through reading the big book and actually through the help of my sponsor, I was able to see really the extent of my self-centeredness and my self-seeking behaviors. And I really understood that those behaviors were just as destructive to me, or could be as destructive to me, as was my drinking. So I made a decision to change. I made a decision to go on with the rest of the steps. And I found that and I still find that those inventory steps were probably the most valuable to me, and I still use them to this day. Because in looking at my resentments and my fears, I was able to bring some clarity into what actually was happening, to understand what was motivating me to be the way I was, and to understand what personal characteristics I had that I needed to change in order to live a happily sober life. And that will be a lifelong process for me to identify those personal characteristics, which I actually have considered like a defense mechanism that helped me deal with my fear and insecurities. And so for the rest of my life, I'm going to be dealing with those personal traits or character defects. And so that's a big part of my recovery. Also, going through the amends process was really important to me because there was a lot of shame attached to my alcoholism. And there were people on this that I knew that I would pass on the street, and if I saw them, I would want to walk the other way. I couldn't look people in the eye. I was so ashamed of myself. And I needed to get things squared away with these people. I needed to be able to pass them on the street and literally look them in the eye. So I went to these people, and mostly they were people that I had worked for or worked with. And I let them know, especially with the employers who had such a hard time with me when I was drinking. And anyway, it was very, very, very helpful to me because I did actually see these people on the street because, Kansas City downtown is not that big. And I could talk to them and say hello. So, yes, that was great. Then there were other amends, though, that I had to make that were maybe a little bit more subtle. And that had to do mainly with my family. My father in particular, when I first told him I was an alcoholic, I've never hardly ever seen him cry, but that was one time when he just broke down in tears, and he started taking bottles of booze and just pouring them down the sink. That's how my alcoholism affected him. And the hurt was so deep that to sit with him and talk about the past was not something that he would want to do. And I knew that was not going to be something that he would be comfortable with. I talked to people about it. And we ultimately agreed that, John, what you need to do for your dad is you need to stay sober a day at a time and live independently and self-sufficiently. And that's what I did. And I went and I stayed with him on holidays, and I visited with him, and I just tried to be a good son. And that was my amends to him. And that was, to a large extent, for my other family members as well. But there were things I needed to take care of. I had done some dishonest and, wrong things that I had to set straight. But anyway, having gone through that process, I learned that these are tools that I can use in my everyday living. I had a challenge last year at work. I was in some trouble. I wasn't doing my job as I really should be doing it, and I was in danger of getting fired. And so I really had to take an honest look at what was going on with me at work, and take a look at my resentments and my fears and everything. And in doing that, just like with the first time I went through the steps, I was actually able to understand why I was behaving the way I was, and I was able to put in a plan of action to make change. And I turned everything around, and now my boss and her boss, they look at me, they think I'm an amazing success story. And I'm like, well, you should have seen me the day when I walked out of jail some time ago. So that was like, yeah. But that's Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what it's done for me. Now, for most of my time in AA, I was very much a by the book kind of a guy. I was never a very religious person, but I did what they suggested, and I prayed in the morning and night, and I prayed during the day, and I just really tried to work the program as one who believed, and I didn't have any problem with it, I guess. And I sponsored people, and I sponsored them the way that I was sponsored, going through the books. And then in 1999, my father died unexpectedly. And my life changed a little bit because I began to take a look at where I was in my life. I was 36 years old, and I had never been married. I hadn't graduated college. I had never owned a home. And I just thought it was time to take care of these things. So I went to work. And so for the next 5 years, the first 10 years of my sobriety, AA was everything in my life. It was the center of my life. It was everything. But during that next 5 years after my father died, AA was my foundation, but I started spending more time outside of the AA meetings, going to school, dating, doing things that I could now do as a sober person. And I was able to achieve all of those goals that I wanted to achieve. Then when I went back to school, I started learning to think a little bit more critically, and I began to question things. And one of the things I began to question was my belief, and specifically my belief in a God. And it was really over a period of time that, I stopped praying. I stopped getting on my knees, but I wasn't telling people I wasn't praying, but I just stopped. And over a period of time, these doubts just began creeping in, and I was just going to meetings, and I was just talking the talk and saying the things that I know that people like to say, where I'd see the heads bob up and down, but I was kind of stagnant. I really wasn't going anywhere. But then something happened that helped me tremendously, and that was when I finally accepted that I am an atheist. I do not have any theological belief whatsoever. I am comfortable with the idea that there is no God, and I started reading these books that I didn't want anyone to know I was reading, and I was very comfortable with this idea of being an atheist, but I was also afraid. I was afraid that I wouldn't belong in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so the first thing I did is I went back to the big book, and I studied it again. And I don't mean any disrespect, but I did it a little bit differently this time. Rather than using a highlighter, I got out a black Sharpie, and I started crossing out the supernatural aspects. And what I saw when I did that was the practical program of action that had always kept me sober and was working for me. And as I went through the book, and I got to the chapter to the Agnostics, I had to just rewrite it. I wrote it as if it was written by a real agnostic or atheist. But I also wrote it in a very respectful way to those who believe. Because what I learned through this process is that we believers and non-believers in AA have far more in common than not. The higher power is nothing more than what empowers us to take the action. And those of us who have religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs might believe that there's a God that empowers them to take this action. Those of us who are atheists or agnostic, we believe it's the people in the rooms that empower us to take the action. But the actions that we take are the same. The only difference is the way that we express the experience. The only difference is the way that we explain it or describe it. Everything we do otherwise is just the same. Now, I was comfortable with this whole philosophy, but when I was going to my home group at P3, things weren't the same for me anymore. I was no longer comfortable hearing the reading How It Works, for example, because I knew that I did not need to find him now. And I felt that it wasn't congruent with the way that I understand the program now. And I began speaking out, and I began trying to share in the group how I was now experiencing the program and how I understood my past experience. And I wasn't getting the bobbing heads of approval. I was having people explain that big book to me like I had never read it, or correct me or share at me. And it was a different feeling. And it got to where I felt like I was walking on eggshells around that home group that I've been going to for 25 years. And I don't want to paint them as if they were doing this. And it could have just been my imagination. I don't know. Just how I felt. I didn't feel comfortable in AA anymore. I didn't feel like I fit in. Well, I started looking on the internet to learn if there were other people out there like me. And I found out there were. Actually, atheists have been involved in Alcoholics Anonymous from the very beginning. It was Jim Burwell, who was an atheist, who was involved with the discussions and the debates about the wording of the steps. It was Jim Burwell who said, God as we understood him, to make this possible. Hank Parkhurst, another atheist, who helped Bill create what later became AA World Services. So we've been here since the very beginning. We've helped build this fellowship. Also, AA groups for agnostics and atheists have been meeting ever since 1975, and I plugged into this whole community. So I went up to the only other atheist I knew at my home group, and I said, Jim, would you like to start an AA meeting for agnostics and atheists? And he said yes. And then we agreed to start the We Agnostics group. Now, if you're wondering what a meeting is like at a We Agnostics meeting, it's just like any other meeting. We do not open and close with a prayer is the only difference. We share our experience, strength, and hope like you do any other AA meeting. We open with the AA preamble. We're probably not a big fan of the big book, but a lot of people aren't. Anyway, something happened in 2014. I went to a convention in Santa Monica, which totally catapulted my experience in AA into a whole new direction. And what it was the We Agnostics and Freethinkers International AA Convention that they had in Santa Monica. And it totally blew me away because I met people from all over the world who were like me. They were non-believers, but very passionate about AA. And the speakers there were amazing. There was Phyllis H., who at the time was the chair of the General Service Office of AA. And also there was Reverend Ward Ewing, who spoke, who was the past chair of the General Service Board. So that was really amazing to hear these people. And I was on fire for AA. At this convention, people were talking about going and starting meetings, secular meetings. And it was just really exciting. It was like AA was brand new. So I came back to Kansas City from that convention, and I wanted to get involved in general service. And it was kind of funny because I was expecting a fight when I walked into my first district meeting, but they were happy to see me. I was welcomed with open arms. And I love those people still to this day. And I started going to the area assembly. And again, I thought I was going to have to fight. I'm totally welcome there. And what has been really interesting to see is I've been able to meet past delegates from in the area assembly. And I've just all kinds of people who have devoted their lives and dedicated their time to service to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I find it so inspiring. And most of them are believers, but they're very supportive and helpful to me. And they've taught me so much. And they've given me just a renewed respect and admiration for this fellowship. So, yeah, I probably got involved in general service for all the wrong reasons. I was a bit of a revolutionary, I think. I really wanted to change AA. I wanted to make it a little bit more contemporary, and I still do. but I want to do it maybe in a more gentle way. I think there's a lot of things that we can change, you know. I love our big book, but again, I like to look at it as a foundation document. It's where we started, and it's a great thing to build upon. But, you know, I know Al-Anon updates their literature all the time, and we don't. We don't update our program of recovery, and that would be something I would really like to see Alcoholics Anonymous do. So I also want to close with this. Recently, I got appointed to the board of directors for Central Office and of Kansas City, AA Central Office. And I don't know if you know, but recently Sue Ann Kay, our director, passed away. Sue Ann was a lovely person. I really respected her a lot. After we started our group, I used to go visit her when the Central Office, I think they stayed open on Friday nights, and we would sit and talk. And though we had different experiences, she was very respectful of me. I gave her a book that I liked that was called Waiting, a Non-Believer's Higher Power. And I didn't think she would ever read it. But one of the last things that she said to me is, she says, "Hey, John, I want to show you something." And she had that book stocked in Central Office. And she says, "I'm so proud of that." I thought, that's really cool, Sue Ann. So, yeah, Sue Ann has passed away. Central Office also is just really having a hard time. And you might know this. But a lot of groups are withholding contributions because they've lost faith in Central Office. They don't trust it. And that's their right to do so, to use the power of the purse if they want. But I would just encourage those groups that, aside from just withholding their funds, to get involved. Get involved and make your voice heard. Don't just hold the money. Make your voice heard. Go to the board meetings. You know, be proactive and make the change that you want to happen with Central Office. I just think that the Central Office is so incredibly important. And I'm speaking to somebody who was ready to jump off a bridge before I called Central Office. And I carry the Central Office phone. I've been doing it once a year now, ever since we started our group. And it's such an honor for me to be able to answer that phone, Alcoholics Anonymous, and to be able to speak with people who were like me some 30 years ago, really ready to jump off a bridge. So, anyway, very grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous, very grateful for this fellowship, and thank you for letting me share.